Everyone keeps asking the same question. Is the United States about to go to war with Iran again? News alerts flash, social media explodes, oil prices twitch, politicians issue carefully worded statements that sound calm but feel ominous. And yet, despite decades of tension, sanctions, threats, and near misses, a full-scale war has never actually happened. That's the mystery. Because if you look at the map, the military power imbalance, the history of hostility, and the sheer number of flashpoints, a war between Iran and the United States feels almost inevitable. So why hasn't it happened? And more importantly, what has changed today that makes people believe this time could be different? Don't swear that. We have to rewind, not just years but generations. Setting the stage, history, power, and hidden systems, the Iran-US conflict is often framed as ideological, democracy versus theocracy, West versus Middle East, freedom versus control. But that explanation is incomplete. This story isn't just about religion or politics. It's about power, money, oil, pride, and fear woven together over decades. Before 1979, Iran was actually one of America's closest allies in the region. The Shah of Iran was backed by Washington, armed by the West, and deeply integrated into the global financial system. Iran sold oil-bought weapons and played by Western rules. Then came the Iranian Revolution. Shah fell, a new Islamic republic rose, and overnight, Iran went from strategic partner to ideological enemy. The US didn't just lose an elite, lost influence, access and control over one of the world's most critical energy corridors. From that moment on, the relationship froze into something far more dangerous than open war, permanent hostility without resolution. And that kind of conflict doesn't fade. It compounds. Origins. How the conflict was born. The origins of today's tension lie in three key events. First, the 1953 coup, when the CIA helped overthrow Iran's democratically elected prime minister after he moved to nationalize Iran's oil. For many Iranians, this moment never disappeared from memory. It became proof that foreign powers would intervene whenever Iran tried to control its own resources. Second, the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which replaced a Western-backed monarchy with a system explicitly designed to resist Western dominance. The hostage crisis that followed wasn't just a diplomatic incident. It was a psychological rupture that reshaped how Americans viewed Iran. Third, the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, where the US supported Iraq indirectly, even as chemical weapons were used. Iran's survived bout learned a brutal lesson. In a crisis, it would stand alone. From that point forward, Iran's strategy became clear. Never be weak, never rely on others, and never let the US dictate your future. That mindset still drives Iranian policy today. The rise, escalation without war over the next decades. The conflict evolved quietly. Iran didn't challenge the US directly. Instead, it invested in asymmetric power, regional allies, and proxy groups, missile programs instead of air superiority, cyber capabilities instead of conventional warfare. The US responded with sanctions layer upon layer of them. By the 2010s, Iran was one of the most sanctioned countries on earth. Its currency collapsed multiple times. Inflation surged. Ordinary people paid the price. And yet, the system didn't break. Why? Because sanctions, while devastating economically, often strengthen hardliners politically. They create siege mentality. They reduce incentives to compromise. This led to a fragile experiment. The nuclear deal. For a brief moment, it seemed like the cycle might break. But deals require trust, and trust was already gone. So why does today feel more dangerous than before? Because multiple pressure points are colliding at once. Iran faces internal economic strain, demographic pressure, and rising public frustration. The US faces global overstretch, political polarization, and declining appetite for endless conflict. At the same time, the Middle East has become more interconnected and more volatile. Every regional conflict now has global consequences. Oil markets react instantly. Shipping lanes become geopolitical weapons. Financial systems absorb shockwaves. What once could be contained now spreads. And the most dangerous moments aren't declarations of war, they're miscalculations. History shows this clearly. Wars don't usually start because leaders want them. They start because leaders think the other side will blink, fall out. The costs. Nobody advertises a US-Iran war wouldn't look like past wars. It wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be clean. And it wouldn't stay regional. Oil prices could spike globally within days. Insurance costs for shipping could surge. Inflation already fragile worldwide could reignite. And unlike previous conflicts, there would be no clear win. The US would face massive logistical and political costs. Iran would absorb severe damage but likely survive, hardened and more radicalized. The biggest losers? Ordinary people, on both sides and far beyond them, because modern wars are not isolated events, they're systemic shocks. Failed fixes. Why past solutions didn't work. Every attempt to solve the Iran-US conflict has failed for the same reason. They treated symptoms, not causes. Sanctions punished economies, but didn't change ideology. Military threats deterred actions, but deepened mistrust. Diplomatic deals were temporary pauses, not structural resolutions. No side ever addressed the core issue, a mutual belief that the other cannot be allowed to win. That belief locks the system in place. If this feels familiar, it should. We've seen this pattern before. Great powers locked in rivalry. Economic pressure used as a weapon, proxy conflicts replacing direct war, public fatigue masking elite escalation. The names change. The logic doesn't. The most dangerous periods in history are not when tensions are highest, but when everyone assumes stability will hold. That's when systems break. 3 clear takeaways. First, this conflict is not about a single incident or headline. It's the result of decades of unresolved power struggle. Second, economic pressure and military deterrence can delay war, but they can also make eventual conflict more destructive. Third, the real risk today is not intention, but misjudgment, a moment where both sides believe escalation is manageable. History says it never is. Final warning, an open-ended thought. The question isn't whether the US and Iran want war. The question is whether their systems are flexible enough to avoid one, because when pride, fear, and pressure collide, logic is often the first casualty. And the world doesn't get to sit this one out. Call to action. If you want deeper, calm, and fact-based breakdowns of global conflicts and how they quietly shape your economy, your future, and your daily life, subscribe to the channel. History doesn't repeat because people forget it. It repeats because they underestimate it. And this story is still being written.